Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm so glad you're here because we are diving into something that looks like just a tiny, boring line item on a construction budget, but is actually a massive operational trap. We're talking about the day one choice between motorized and manual security shutters for your storefront. Seems super straightforward, right? You look at a quote, see the price difference, and make a call. But as we're going to see from the source material today, treating this as just a quick budget decision usually leads to a huge hidden trap, the true cost of retrofix. So this is the million-dollar question. Well, maybe more like the thousands of dollars question, right? Will saving a little bit of money today cost you double tomorrow? Look, it is incredibly tempting to see the immediate savings of a manual install and think, hey, I'm making a really smart, lean business decision. But what actually happens a year from now? Are you really saving a buck today? Or are you literally just guaranteeing that you're going to pay twice for the exact same storefront later on? Our sources completely flip the script on this one. There's this fantastic quote from a highly experienced installer that hits the nail right on the head. They said, "Most owners think the decision is about budget. It mostly isn't. It's about operations." We really need to reframe this entire decision. You've got to put down the initial invoice you're looking at and step into the actual daily reality of running your store. Because how that store opens and closes every single day, that is what dictates the true cost of your security. Let's just walk through the physical, everyday reality of closing up shop. Think about the manual process for a second. You have to grab a hook, latch the bottom, physically pull the whole thing down, and honestly, that takes some serious effort and really awkward motions, and then finally lock it at the floor. Sure, after a few weeks it becomes muscle memory, but it's always a physical chore. Now picture a motorized setup. The routine becomes incredibly seamless. You lock the front door, hit a button on the wall, and just walk out. The shutter handles the whole shebang itself. When you contrast that heavy, sweaty physical effort with a simple button push, you really start to see why this is a daily operational choice, not just a one-time financial one. Now, to be completely fair, manual shutters aren't inherently bad. Let's jump into section 1, the exceptions, and look at when manual actually works. There are 3 very specific, totally valid use cases for going manual. First up, if the opening is small, we're talking 4 to 7 feet wide, and sits right at chest height where you can easily pull it down without straining, manual is a perfectly good call. Takes maybe a minute tops. Second, if the shutter goes over a storage room or a back cage, and it's rarely closed, maybe just once a week, manual works beautifully because the daily hassle is practically zero. And finally, sometimes you just can't have electricity. Maybe pulling a new circuit is a total nightmare, the building has ancient wiring, or your lease strictly forbids new electrical work. In those 3 edge cases, a manual installation is honestly the perfect move. Simpler install, lower maintenance, and you're good to go. But, of course, those are the exceptions, which brings us right to section 2, the trap of everyday operations. Imagine you've got a really wide or super tall storefront opening. Anything over 8 feet wide or above standard door height changes the game completely. Physically wrestling with a massive 12-foot manual shutter every single night? Yeah, that gets old incredibly fast. The strap is super heavy, the motion is super awkward. As one of our installers pointed out, the owner who insists on a giant manual system just to save a few bucks is literally the exact same owner who calls back a year later begging for an expensive retrofit. So, the absolute crucial point here boils down to the number 3. If you have 3 or more people on a closing rotation, manual systems suddenly turn into a massive liability. Think about it. If it's just you, the owner, closing up every night, it's easy enough to form those manual habits. But the second you shift to a team rotation, an owner, an assistant manager, and maybe a swing shift kid, manual training and diligence just completely fall apart. With a motorized system, the training is dead simple and identical for everyone. Push the button, the shutter goes down. It completely standardizes your security across the entire team. And let's compound that with the reality of a really busy shift. Picture a chaotic restaurant, a packed bar, or a busy dispensary. Closing time is an absolute frenzy. You're cashing out registers, you're scrubbing down the store, you're trying to prep for tomorrow morning. If your lockup procedure adds 5 minutes of sweaty, heavy physical labor to the very end of an already exhausting shift, well, human nature takes over. That is a security procedure absolutely guaranteed to get skipped. Motorized systems survive the actual operational reality of a tired staff, while manual systems often just don't. Plus, there's another massive operational advantage to going motorized. And honestly, I found this part fascinating while reading through the sources. A motorized setup can easily pair with a smart bridge unit. This is just a little device they set up during install that connects your storefront Wi-Fi directly to a phone app. And why is that a huge deal? Because it totally eliminates the midnight panic drive. If you've ever gotten into bed at 11 p.m. and suddenly couldn't remember if the new closer actually locked the storefront, well, this app lets you verify the lockup and even close the shutter yourself, right from your couch. It is an absolute game changer for your peace of mind. And all of that brings us to the core focus of today's explainer. Section 3, the climax, the true cost of retrofits. Let's just look at the brutal math of making the wrong choice on day one. When an owner goes with a cheap manual install to save some cash on a large storefront, the daily friction we just talked about inevitably leads to them calling for a motorized retrofit by year 2. But here's the trap. The labor cost is where they get you. That retrofit ends up costing drastically more than the initial price difference between manual and motorized would have been. Why? Because you're not just buying a motor now. You are essentially paying an installer to do the exact same installation twice. Sometimes a retrofit costs almost as much as a brand new, fresh install. You tried to save money up front, and you literally ended up paying double. But wait, it actually gets worse. Here is easily the most shocking fact from our source material. You might call your installer a year later, wallet in hand, ready to pay for that expensive retrofit, only to find out you can't. No way. 50%, half of all manual shutters, simply lack the housing depth or the right slat profile to even accept a motor swap later on. They were literally built without the physical room to add a motor. So for half the businesses out there, upgrading doesn't just mean a retrofit. It means tearing down the entire manual system and buying a whole new motorized shutter entirely from scratch. Now, in the spirit of keeping things fully objective, let's flip the coin for a second. Where do owners get it wrong when they actually do choose motorized? 2 words: backup failure. If you pick a motorized shutter without thinking about a manual override or a battery backup, you are leaving yourself incredibly vulnerable during a power outage. Most modern motors have these options available, but they have to be configured right at the time of installation. If you don't explicitly ask your installer to walk you through that failure mode, you could easily end up with a shutter that physically cannot be closed or opened when the grid goes down. So, knowing all of this, let's dive right into Section 4, how to choose today. Every single business owner needs to take these 3 highly practical steps during their initial site walkthrough with an installer. Step 1, count the closers. How many people are actually going to be closing up the shop? If the answer is more than 1, your default should instantly be motorized. The training consistency alone totally justifies the cost. Step 2, the physical test. Stand directly under the opening and pretend to pull down a manual shutter. If you can do it without straining or reaching awkwardly, manual is still on the table. If you can't, the debate's over. And step 3, the power question. If you go motorized, you absolutely must ask your installer, hey, where does the power come from? Are they tying into an existing circuit, or do you need a new run pulled straight from the electrical panel? You've got to get that answer before the install ever begins. Which leaves us with this final thought today. When you're staring at those quotes for your new security setup, you really have to ask yourself, are you building your storefront for the invoice sitting on your desk today, or are you building it for the actual daily operations of tomorrow? Because picking manual just to save a few bucks right now might guarantee a super frustrating, physically demanding, and incredibly expensive retrofit in your future. Make the choice that actually fits how your business runs. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to look at your own daily operations with a totally fresh set of eyes. See you next time.